Well, that's one of the easiest things that could start to change in education. Let those little boys start, at least 1 year later. Because when you think about the educational system, it is geared for female style of learning. It's not geared for the little boys. So trying to put them on the same path, the same course, is just like the boys are being set up for failure, basically. And so yes, but if people don't understand those differences, and that's not to say that those little girls are better or smarter or anything else. It's just their rate of development is different, and that needs to be understood and respected.
Everyone, welcome back to Living the Next Chapter. I have another great author joining us today on the podcast, and I'm excited to have her on because we're going to definitely connect around her topics and what she's writing about. She's got a great story for the world, and she's joining us from far from where I am here in Canada, which is exciting for me all the time to meet these amazing people from around the world. So I'm so happy to have Kathryne on the podcast. Kathryne, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
Excellent. Let everybody know where you are in this great big world of ours.
I'm in Itoshima, Japan, which is the most southwestern island of Japan.
Wow. So how long have you been in Japan?
Total is about 25, 26 years, but coming and going. I'm Canadian by birth, so.
There you go. So we have that in common. And you have a connection with East Coast of Canada as well.
Yeah, I was raised in the Annapolis Valley in Nova Scotia.
Beautiful. Yeah, I've been there several times. I love Nova Scotia.
Oh, it's beautiful.
I was working for the grocery chain Sobeys at the time.
Okay.
So I was out there for a week.
Okay.
And I was in the office, but I had a rental car. And I would tell the people in the office, I'm going to the ocean. And they're like, I'm like, well, I'm from Ontario. I don't get to see the ocean very often. So I did a nice drive on my own. And it's a beautiful part of the world. So such nice people as well. Just love that part of the world. So
in general, I think Canadians are very friendly people.
Yeah. It's amazing. So now how do you go from Canada and that part of Canada to Japan? There's got to be a little bit of a story to this as well. How did you end up where you are?
Well, I started from the East Coast in Canada, and actually as far east as you could go. I went to university at Memorial in Newfoundland. And then I worked my way across, basically. And then by the time I got to Vancouver, I spent 6 or 7 years there. And then I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I'd reached the end of Canada. So I think that was kind of a sign for me. And it just happened, not just happened, but it happened that at the time when I was just unsettled, not knowing what next steps were, I read James Clavell's Shogun. And up until that point, I had no interest or knowledge really about Asia in general. My interest had always been Africa, and I thought, someday that's where I'll head. But I read this book, and I can't tell. There's no logical reason why it resonated so deeply, but I have never had such an experience with a book, and it was so clear and profound. I was supposed to go to Japan. So within 3 months, I packed it up and took a plane and 2 suitcases, and that was the start.
Wow. Well, now you're here as an author. Have you ever contemplated the idea or the thought that somebody might have the same kind of reaction to something that you would write as an author, that it could change somebody's perspective or give them a new focus in life? Like,
yeah,
you have the same power with your words that book also had on you.
Well, I think in general, I believe that the whole idea of, when the time is right, or however the saying goes, when the time is right, the teacher appears. My career has been in education. So my way of thinking has always been there's a possibility all the time that something I do or say is going to really impact someone else's life, even though I don't know. I may never know. And so having that thought just puts importance on, everything you do, because that possibility is always there. You can help somebody.
It's amazing. And just the power of words and how they can shape a future, how they can redirect a path, or
very much so.
Put you in a place that you weren't even anticipating. It's amazing how the impact an author can have on our lives.
Yes, very much so.
It's amazing. So tell me, okay, when did your author journey then begin? When did you cross the line from I'm not an author, I've never really considered it, to now here we are as having this conversation? Something happened there in that process. What was it for you that got you started on this path?
I think I always knew at some point I wanted to write, and I always thought, and I still think, it's children's books that really resonate with me, and I have the whole thing planned in my head and scripted out and everything. And I knew I wanted to write a memoir at some point because I've read so many, and it's a way of leaving a little bit of yourself for your friends, your family, or anyone else who might be impacted by the journey that you took. So I kind of had that in mind. I didn't know when it was going to happen. And then but I always had something like on the desktop. I was working on my memoir mostly. And, every, I don't know, holiday, teaching holiday, I would pull it out and I'd look at it again and add a few things. And then when 3.5 years, it's almost 4 years now, I retired. And I knew that in retirement, I wasn't going to retire, but I hadn't yet decided what I was going to do and how I was going to do it. But I was also burnt out from the last 10 years of my work. And I had said to my husband at the time, I want the first 6 months with I don't want to think about the future. And I have a book inside me for our son. And that is the book that has to come out before anything else happens. And so I did. I sat down. I had started it beforehand, but I wrote for 6 months almost, and then self-published that book just for him and me. Like there's only 2 copies out there. But it was my heart and soul. And it was, that was what I needed to do so that was the first step, really. I wanted my words to always be at his fingertips, even when I wasn't.
So a book with a very limited press,
yep.
with 2 copies. How did that change you? Like, how did that give you focus? How did that give you a sense of, well, this is something I would like to pursue more? How did you change in the process of writing that first book for your son?
Well, it was a bit of a soul search because I wanted my son to know my heart and my thinking. And yet I thought he doesn't need to know all the dirty details. I still want him to have a good image of his mom. And so there was a lot of just soul searching. Like there was a lot of that there. So that was like 2/3 of the book was really in response to a question he had asked of me when he was in his early 20s, which is such a hard time for a young man. So I did that part of the book, and then my dad was a storyteller, and I just had this idea of a fiction story, and so I added that on for the last maybe quarter of the book. And what that showed me was that the first part of the work, it was from my heart, but it was hard. It was hard. And the second part was fun. Like it was just, I had so much fun, like creating these characters and incorporating the points I had made in the story, in a fiction story. So that was something I hadn't expected to be filled with such joy at writing, even if it was only my son and I that would ever read it.
So when you think back to your dad being a storyteller, what kind of things stand out to you as good elements to include in a story? Like, what did you learn from him in his storytelling abilities?
Mostly was the creative aspect, the imagination, the magic. That was kind of his thing. Like the way he had so much depth in how he told the story. So he'd have kids sitting, by his feet, listening to these stories, and he'd either have them all, laughing uncontrollably or sobbing desperately, and that had a big impact on. But if I was just to say one word, it would be imagination. He had a beautiful, beautiful, magical imagination.
If you could gather around a bunch of young authors then and talk about storytelling and how it's so important for your book, what else could you add to that to encourage young authors in their journey? Because you have authors listening to this show, listening to our conversation right now, and they're looking for some guidance around how to tell a better story in their books. What kind of things could you give them as some key elements?
Well, I really think the whole thing about life is being curious and always learning. So I imagine most people who want to write are avid readers. And I think when you're really curious about, what spoke to you, like what really made you laugh or what really made you cry, or what are those books when you reach, your third act in life that still they're in your head. Those are the books you're not going to start reading and think, oh, did I read this before or not? You're going to know that was one of the best books I read. So I don't know if that answered your question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because the one thing I've heard from other authors in conversation was just simply to allow life to stick to you, because you never know where inspiration's going to come from for a chapter, a thought. So it's kind of like that sweater that we all seem to have, or that piece of clothing, where everything just kind of seems to stick to it. It's like, what is this fluff? Where did this come from? But let stories stick to you, because you never know when you're going to need to go deep into that,
I think
depths of what you've learned.
Yeah,
right?
and I think we forget, I certainly know I forget. And I wish someone had have said to me when I was in the early years of my career, write it down, make your notes, have a file, have a book, whatever, because you will forget that really funny story that happened at work today. And that's true. I wish I had done that.
And that's a great point then for the people listening, is to be more self-aware and document, keep track.
Yeah.
And again, like I mentioned, just let these things stick to you. Let them be really sticky. Because again, you'll never know when you're going to need to reference that, or it's going to feed an idea.
Yeah.
And you're right.
Exactly.
Right. Excellent. How much training or how much learning did you have in the early days of your writing? Is it all self-taught? Like, who was your inspiration in all this?
Well, I would say it was all self-taught up until within that first year, about 3 years ago. My whole life has been the things that are meant to happen come into my world, and that's how things go. And so a good friend of mine that we had worked together in Beirut, she just sent me a note and said that she was working with this woman in Holland, and she had been part of a co-author group. And this woman was creating a third book, and she was looking for writers to join to talk about the theme of it was authenticity. And so this friend knew, and because I had commented when the second book with my friend's section in it had been published, and I commented, and so she just was letting me know that this third book is happening, and they're looking for authors, and she would connect me with this woman. So that woman is a writing coach and a business coach. And she's still in my world. But for the writing process, for probably 6 months, we worked weekly. And I learned so much. And if there was one thing I learned from that is if you can afford it, do it earlier. Because there were things that I thought I knew. And she was able to pull out so much more that was there that I didn't know was there. So, of course, I learned a little bit more about story structure and that, but that wasn't it. It was, as a writer, I didn't know that I could go deeper. I didn't know there was something more than what I was giving. And she helped pull that out.
Wow. Yeah. And I guess that's the one thing. I think the right people come along your path and they have something that they can do to help people. And that's kind of the idea behind this podcast is I want to be able to have guests on like yourself and then pull little pieces of your story that a listener can then go, well, that's the missing piece. That's the part I didn't know. And that's the part that's going to help me in my journey. So I just find that podcasting in particular really seems to build a bridge between people and help people who will listen to this at any point in the future as well and learn from that. Yeah. So I love that. Take us a little bit through your writings now. You have the book for you and your son, which obviously we don't have access to. But it sounds like you're very proud of the results from that. Yeah. Take us through what else you've been writing and kind of a little bit more of that background on what your works are.
Well, as I said, with this writing group, it's not been published yet because there haven't been the full number of authors. But I finished my part in that book, so that was the one thing that got completed. And then the other most recent and very proud part for me is I published a parenting book, and it's called Raising Boys Who Become Remarkable Men. Mm-hmm. And that, again, was another real deep learning process in many, many ways, and still is for me.
So what was the origin story for Raising Boys, that book as well? Take us back there.
Well, I was kind of put into the path of wanting to learn as much as I could about boys, about raising boys. I gave birth to our son. I was older when I gave birth. So, and I've been working in early years and lower elementary. So I thought, okay, I know about kids. I've spent 10 years with children. I've kind of got that. I have myself straightened out. I'm at an age where, I've lived, the things that I wanted to do as a single person and was ready to settle down. So I thought I had things, pretty well sewed up. And I was really excited about this part of starting a family and raising a boy. I came from a lot of women, females. And so I was really sure about women. And I have self-studied a lot about women because I grew up in the 60s and 70s. So when he came along, I thought I knew it. But again, I continued to, I read nonstop. And if I'm not learning something, I'm not complete. I want to be learning something all the time. So, I read all of the parenting books that you read as you go along, and especially the first 3 years, a lot of really great material out there to help the parents figure out what's going on in the world of parenting. But something happened when he was 3 or 4 years old, and that particular incident got me going down a road of what is it like in the emotional world of a little boy, and why are there these societal expectations that just aren't meshing with what I'm seeing in my little boy. A little bit stronger than that, but it spun my world around. And that started a search that has now, it's 26, 27 years that I've been trying to understand deeper, and then share, and try to make the world a little bit better for boys, male, and in particular for parents who are struggling with just not getting their boys, and the boys not getting themselves.
Yeah, I have a podcast called Dad Space, and I'm going to have you come on there in the future too. I'd love to have you there, because I'm finding from a male perspective that there's doesn't seem to be the same volume of resources and conversations that help for dads, but also for boys. So when we first met, I'm like, wow, this is so needed, because I just think that we could probably do better as parents if we had resources like yours that kind of help guide the conversation, guide our plannings, guide how we raise our children. And, boys are their own unique little wired machines. They're very unique. So I'm interested that you wrote this book.
The first book that I read, and the reason that I have taken the information and tried to share it so much with parents and teachers and educators, it was a book by Dr. William Pollock called Real Boys. And that was in the 90s, I think he published that. And he has Institute for Males or something. I should always look up that title before I speak of it, but I forget. But he works out of Harvard, and he has, done quite extensive research on gender. And he was the first one that I heard talk about, the boy code, which since then I've heard it also called the man box. And he was the one that I heard about time silence and some of these gender differences. But it was from his work and reading. One of his other books was Real Boys' Voices, and it was the actual interviews that he did with a lot of these males. And when I was reading their words, it was like, what's wrong with this picture? Why are so many men broken? And there's just this disconnect between expectations and actual, the real stuff. And at the end of his book, so I got all fired up reading his book and thought, this is great. This gives me something to chew on, and I can work with this. And at the very end of it, he said something to the point of, if you got anything out of this book, then it's your responsibility to share it with others, like spread the word. So that's what I took that very seriously. And I thought, okay, I'm going to learn more and I'm going to share, because it's not right. It's just not right. Just recently, in this last week, someone had recommended 2 things for me to watch. And the first one it's called Close. And it was a few years back, and it won prizes for international foreign films or something like that. It won quite a lot of awards. And I think it was filmed in Belgium, France, in collaboration. And it's about these 2 young boys that are 13 years old, and deep friendship, like really beautiful, deep friendship that started to go down the wrong path because of peer pressure and homophobic tendencies. Yeah. And it ended up, it didn't end well. I won't, in case someone happens to, think, oh, I'm going to watch this. It didn't end well. Yeah. But it was that same thing. And it was so well done. It kind of felt like you were a fly on the wall, understanding a little bit of this pain and turmoil that goes on in these, young boys' world. And so that was one of them. And then the other one, I actually don't remember exactly what it's called. I just watched it the other day, but it was like a flip story. And it was about The title will come to me at some point. But it was this kind of weird thriller thing that I would not have watched. Like I don't watch anything like that, except it was highly recommended, that it was a good one. And the focus was girl. And anyway, the whole base of it was, the story was based on this girl's best friend who had committed suicide because she had been gang raped at university when she was drunk. And that's how the whole story was. So it was very much from a female perspective. And it was like, what is wrong with this world? Like, how is it? Like, that's more than possible that those things all happen in people's lives. But why? Like, where have we gone so wrong that is the world that we're living in? It just, I don't know. I find it very disturbing, but that's why I do what I do. That's why I wrote the book, because I know somewhere there is a mom and a dad, just like me, who is trying to raise their son the best they can. They're pulling all the tools they can, and something is not sitting right, and they can't quite put their finger on it. And it's that whole thing, you don't know.
Yeah. So can you give us an example of one of the tools mentioned in your book that we could leverage as a parent?
Well, the first thing, and it's the most difficult thing to get people to understand and buy into, is this whole concept of unconscious gender bias. And whenever I say that, there's usually a glaze that goes over people's faces, but that's the first thing. That was what turned the corner for me. I thought I had no biases. I thought I know about stereotyping. I've been working with little boys and little girls for, quite a long time. There's been a focus on gender neutrality. Little girls can do anything little boys can do. Little boys can do anything. I thought that was not part of my unconscious world. I knew it was not part of my conscious world. And then when that incident happened with me, it was kind of like, where'd that come from? Like, it's there. I just didn't recognize it. There are some really, there's some good research that has been done. There's two things that I often refer parents to. And one of them is this, it was this experiment that there was individually, some adults were interviewed, asked a list of questions about a portrait. And the first time they went in for their interview, the portrait was of what looked like, a little toddler boy with boy clothes and that. And they asked questions like his name, his hobby, what his character might be like, what his future might, some of those basic questions. And then they did the same thing with a second portrait, and it looked like a little toddler girl from how she was dressed, and asked the same kind of questions. And then when they were finished, they brought everyone back together, and they showed the two portraits, and they said, look at your answers and how you answered based on these two portraits, and then think about it in light of it's the same child. And yeah. And it was kind of, okay, that was that. It just shakes your thinking up. It's like, well, I put that expectation for behavior for a character based on if I thought it was a boy or a girl. I didn't think about it. And so that was quite a fascinating one. And then the other one was BDC did an experiment about toys, boy toys and girl toys, and same kind of thing. But what they did was they had these toddlers, and they dressed them in the opposite gender clothing. So a little girl looked like a little boy, because you can't really tell the difference when they're toddlers anyway. Yeah. And what they noticed, people came in one at a time. Their objective was just to play with the child for a little bit. That was it. And they recorded it. And the results were, if they thought it was a boy, if the child was dressed like a boy, they chose certain toys that were stereotypically boys. They spoke with them differently, and they handled them differently. And when it was over, what I found the most fascinating in that one was all of them, when they were told that that child that they had been playing with was the opposite gender, and then asked, well, what do you think about the way you interacted, the toys you picked, the words you used? And all of them said that they were shocked that they had responded on a gender basis without even knowing it. And they were sure, like I was, that they didn't have unconscious gender bias. So that's the scary thing, is because you don't know what you don't know. So you have to get intrigued enough that you will, take some of that, do some of that yourself. Take those little tests or join that little challenge or do something where you just kind of, it gets your head thinking, what else am I doing unconsciously? Am I parenting differently? So every time you react to your child, I focus on boys. So every time you react to the misbehavior of your young boy, would you react the same way if he was a girl?
Mm-hmm.
And then things start to change in your thinking.
Yeah, I can see that as a father. Like when my children were small, you're rough and tumbly with your boys, and you're gentle and playful and with your daughter.
Yeah.
It's just there's something, a little light switch that goes on and off that just you change.
Exactly.
Right? And why is that? Right.
Yeah.
Interesting. So how is your book going to help us kind of address this? Is it through knowledge? Is it through understanding it and seeing the world? Do you lead us somewhere in the book?
Yeah, the first part of it is, or one section in the first part is about gender bias, and there are some examples in there. And I put a link to there is a quiz that it's Commonwealth of something. Anyway, I wrote directly to them, asked if I could get permission and to share that with more people, and they were very happy to do that. So it's an online quiz thing. So that's one of the things, because as a parent, when I read a book, it's fine to read the book, but sometimes you need another avenue to go just a little bit further, to open a different door, and people love quizzes. So so that's part of it. The other things in the book is, as you understand different aspects, like I try to share my experiences and my understandings and what I've seen through the eyes of a little boy. So I go into depth about when the child first leaves home and starts going into some kind of an institution, what those, the first year in kindergarten is like, what the I do kindergarten, grade 1 and grade 2, through the eyes of the child. Hopefully that gives, again, parents something to think about. The whole idea of the book is, I don't have all the answers. I've spent, almost 30 years trying to look at this. And so I don't have all the answers. But what I know more than anything else is that if a child is coming from a home where the parents have been open and curious and, trying, just going a little bit deeper than surface. And those boys feel heard, understood, even when society is creating a different world for them. Those boys who have a whole environment where, their mom and dad is saying, look, just because you're a boy, you don't have to do this. Or you're not going to get away with that just because people say boys will be boys. That boy has a different sense of self. He has a different understanding of maybe everything's not so cool in society. Maybe those things, because I know they feel differently, maybe I don't have to follow those rules. Maybe I don't have to be that guy. And that's where the differences can really start to impact, just one child at a time. He impacts his friends. They impact their friends. He becomes a father and raises his son differently.
Right.
Yeah.
And they're all little building block moments that build off each other. It's not just one thing, right? It's a little lesson here and this little lesson. You put those together and then you build on that. You build on that.
Yeah.
So any one of those teachable moments for a young parent with a young child in your home, they're so receptive to being taught and learn and do things the right way. Yeah. And we kind of sometimes skip over that in the hopes that they'll just grow up quicker and we'll move to the next stage. But there's a lot of learning that could happen in those early days and a lot of modeling that we can do as parents, right?
Yeah.
If we understand ourselves
exactly.
and our biases, then we can also then teach better.
Exactly. And that's part of it. Like from the 60s and 70s, from the women's movement, women's roles have improved dramatically, which is wonderful. That was the era that I grew up in. So I know about that stuff. But the problem is that it hasn't been as positive and expansive for boys. And almost it has flipped to the other side. So it's kind of, for the way I think of it is, I think we've got a pretty good grasp. That never, will it be perfect? But I think society has a pretty good grasp of what it means to be a woman. And I think, we've done a good job in that area. I do not think, as a society, we understand what it means to be male. And because we don't understand that I put a poem, an anonymous poem, into the end of the book that I often use in workshops and that. But it's the most, it's the best example of what it is we need to do. And the concept is, both male and female have weaknesses and strengths and challenges. And until we recognize both and are respectful to both the strengths and the weaknesses, then we can't rise together as humanity. Mm-hmm. And so we're out of balance. And what I'm trying to do is help that balance become a little better.
Yeah. And it's not a one-size-fits-all when we look at our children, too. Like, I was listening to one author talk recently, and he was saying that young girls, are a different level as far as brain activity and understanding and everything, almost to the point where you could have girls start school a year sooner than the boys, where the boys could be 1 year behind and then it'd still be more equal because the boys are not at the same level of development.
That's one of
well, that's interesting.
Well, that's one of the easiest things that could start to change in education. Let those little boys start, at least 1 year later. Because when you think about the educational system, it is geared for female style of learning. It's not geared for the little boys. So trying to put them on the same path, the same course, is just like the boys are being set up for failure, basically.
Right.
And so but if people don't understand those differences, and that's not to say that those little girls are better or smarter or anything else. It's just their rate of development is different.
Exactly.
And that needs to be understood and respected.
Yeah, because then the boys are always working from a spot where they're trying to catch up all the time.
Yeah.
When the girls are finding things that are naturally easier to learn or they're developmentally different, the boys are always playing catch up all the time. And there becomes frustration, boys giving up,
they're
not seeing the same results.
Their self-esteem plummets.
Yeah.
And so that's where the whole concept of boys having to put on masks because they can't be themselves. And what they want more than anything else is to be accepted and part of the group. So if they can't do that by being themselves, if that's not the golden ticket, then they will put on a mask and, be another way. But the problem with that is that as that little boy grows up, the more masks that he needs to put on disconnects him from that beautiful inner emotional boy who's in there. So then you have situations like that movie with the gang rape of you have things like that because there are these masks that they put on and on and on and on. I'm not making excuses for the behavior, but I am trying to understand how is that possible? How is that possible from, a young boy who's just, pure joy. But then you look at it, the trajectory of how he begins, especially in education, with a lack of understanding of, what makes him tick. Then, he's going to have challenges.
And then you fast forward, you have generations of men now who have never really had this kind of conversation or had this kind of direction in their life, hiding behind these masks that you talk about, and now acting out as men, not knowing how to show up in this world because they've never had the tools to do this.
Yeah.
They've never been raised with them. Right?
There's quite a bit written about, like my book goes only for the first 8 years.
Yeah.
But there's quite a bit about rites of passage. And one of the things about rites of passage is that sometimes I think that can help a young boy understand, that it's time to give up those boyish ways and move into manhood. But without that tribe of other men around him to support him, he really doesn't know. So he'll find other ways to prove that he's a man, whether that's risky behavior, whether that's illegal things, whether it's just scoring with more girls. He will find ways. It's just trying to prove, because we don't have a system that says it's time to stop being a boy. So you have grown men with boyish behavior.
Right. And then layer on that social media and the world around us and all those other pressures that external, that don't come from within the home. Yeah. That's another whole level that in our generations we didn't have to the same extent. Yeah. We had some, but not to how vast and how far reaching it is as it is today.
Yeah, I think it's I don't know, my heart breaks for young men. I think that they've had it harder than it needs to be.
Yeah. So for the parents listening, contemplating picking up your book, I would love for you to speak to them directly as they're listening to this, going, okay, Kathryne, is this the right book for me, or is this the right book for me to share with the young parents in my community, in my family? Can you speak to the reader and just give them your thoughts about how this book can help impact your family, and especially specifically to the boys in our home?
I believe that all parents do the very best that they can, because we all love our children and we want the best for them. I also believe that we have access to an awful lot of information, and some of it just a little too much. So I also think that parents need to tap into their own knowing. And I think how you do this, how I did that, was reading as many different kinds of information on the topic that I am concerned about, and taking from each one of them what resonates with me. So I might have read, 100 books on raising boys, although there weren't that many when I was raising our son. And from each book, I am able to read something that says, ooh, I didn't think of that before. And if I can even just get one idea that's going to make me a better parent, that's going to make the world for my boy better, then, that's my job. That's my job as a parent. So anyone who is listening to this, especially if you have a boy, but not only, if you have a little girl, she's got friends who are boys. You have a husband, you have a brother, you have a father. Males are half of the human race. Mm-hmm. So, look at books. Find the ones that resonate with you. Why I think my book is a good book, and it's not easy for me to say it because it's not easy to brag. But I worked with children and parents and educators for almost 45 years in 6 different countries and cultures.
Wow.
More importantly, our son is just turned 30. And I would say, if I'm trying to be really objective, that he's a remarkable young man. And I'm not saying I have all the answers, but I will say I have worked and continue to work really, really hard at understanding what it's like for him at each and every stage that he's going through. And the thing is that so many times he didn't understand. So if his parents aren't getting it, what's that little boy? He's going to flounder. So any parent who has a child, any person who's really curious about, male, get started. And if you want a book that's hopefully going to start something, is going to ignite some curiosity in you, then read mine. I know that even if you just take that quiz, and it would be like, okay, I didn't think that. Maybe I will, I'm going to look at things a little bit deeper, or maybe I'm going to go in this direction, or maybe I'm going to really talk to my son differently because now I understand how he's hearing me or what my language is, how is that being received. So I know there are things, without any doubt in my mind, that is going to help some parent raising a boy. I know it.
Mm-hmm. I love it. So again, Kathryne, I mentioned Dad Space, my other podcast, and this is the exact conversation I need over there too, because I think that from a father's point of view, I think some cases we've lost our voice or given up our voice as men. We haven't stepped up. We haven't spoken. We haven't said what we need. We haven't said what we don't know, right? We just assume that, or we give off an air that we know what we're doing, and we have all the answers, but we don't.
Yeah.
We don't, because, we've all been raised differently in different times, and things change. So having a book like yours, I think, is really going to help to kind of open the conversation for parents, between spouses or parent to child, to help us to find a path that we can do this better, right? And I think that's the bonus of your book in the world. And it's interesting when you talk to somebody like you who writes a book like this from a humble place. Like you're not here to brag about the book, but it's a book that can help people. So we want to give it its due and put it in front of people so it can be that resource. So I love the fact that you make time to do this. It's amazing.
Well, thank you for giving me the platform.
It's great. I want to make sure people connect with you too, Kathryne, so that people can then reach out to you. More questions about the book, more questions about you as an author, all of that as well. If you can kind of give us a point of reference, where do we go to talk to you and communicate with you further?
Well, the best place to go is my website, and that's called Sonhood Coaching, SONHOOD, coaching.com. I'm also on Instagram and LinkedIn. Those are the two social medias that I mostly do on. LinkedIn is my name, Kathryne Imabayashi, and Instagram is the website name, Sonhood Coaching.
Can you tell us a little bit more about Sonhood Coaching? I'd love to know more about that as well.
Well, I started that after I finished the book for my son. That was my next project. I decided that if I was going to do something in my retired years, I wanted to just continue on this. This is what resonates with me. This is what I think I can still make an impact. So I didn't quite realize how complicated it was to get it all done. But my son helped me with the website. I created, maybe a dozen online courses, various lengths of content. I created a membership so that people would have a different price point to come in on. And then what resonates with me the deepest is I do one-on-one coaching as well. And that's where I see the magic. Those are the people who are just so ready to have that person to walk beside them and give them the guidance and the support they need to make those really major changes in their world of parent. And that's my happy place, is when I'm actually coaching them.
I love it. Awesome. So we'll have all the information for all of that in the show notes for people to connect with you, and even for your coaching program. It's an amazing addition to the book that's out in the world that we can all have as a resource, but then to have time with you one-on-one to go deeper. I love that you're offering that to us as readers and as listeners as well. So thank you for doing that.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Excellent. Everyone, all the information's in the show notes as always. We do that for every episode of our podcast. Reach out to Kathryne. She's a very interesting person to talk to. And I've learned a lot just in our conversation today, Kathryne. So again, thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you for having me and being so open to this kind of a conversation.
Hey, thanks for listening all the way to the end of the podcast. That's a big signal to all of the players, the YouTubes, the Apples, the Spotifys, that you found value in this episode of Living the Next Chapter. Just by you listening to the end, you just sent a huge bat signal out to the app saying this was a great podcast, a great conversation. So you listening to this point, you've done your job. I have one more ask of you. If you know anyone that would benefit from this conversation, would you share this episode with them? Would you just send them a message, send them the episode, tell them about this episode, tell them to livinginthenextchapter.com to get all the information about the podcast. Can you do that for me? Because the more people that hear this message, this episode, the better. I want to support these amazing authors, and I know you do as well. So sharing this episode really helps, and I appreciate you. See you on the next episode, and thank you for listening to Living the Next Chapter.